If you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you're trying to decide whether or not to invest a meaningful amount of money into working with Peter Crone, specifically through his Freedom Mastermind. So in this video, I want to share an honest pros and cons perspective so that you can make up your own mind. And if you do decide that this is right for you, I have a referral code that gives you 10% off, which I'll share at the end. Also, if you feel this video brings you value, whether that's clarity, perspective, or simply helping you to think more deeply, a thumbs up or even a subscribe would genuinely make my day, and it helps us to reach the people who might really need it. So my name is Helen, and I'm a business, mindset, and life coach, and I attended Peter Crone's Mastermind 2 years ago. Peter Crone is, in my view, one of the most preeminent coaches working today. And I don't say that lightly. The opportunity to be coached by Peter, or even to deeply study his coaching style in an intimate mastermind container over 3 months, is a really special experience. And this is not something that you're going to get from podcasts, Instagram clips, or even books. It is experiential and it's embodied work. And at the heart of Peter's philosophy is a simple but profound idea. We are all living inside a mental prison, or as I like to think about it, a mental prism. I actually like the word prism more because it describes the lens through which we view everything and what actually gets reflected out into the world. And the challenge is that we can't see this lens. It feels like reality. And this is where coaching becomes transformational. Because most of our internal stories, the ones that are shaping our identity, were actually formed very early in life. They're so familiar that we don't even question them. We don't even realize that they are stories. And one of the reasons Peter's work is so effective is that, whether he labels it this way or not, it's fundamentally belief work. And as coaches, we're trained to understand that beliefs sit at the very root of how a life unfolds. If you're familiar with Bruce Lipton, who is an acclaimed cell biologist, author, and speaker, you'll know that his work focuses on how beliefs and perception influence biology. His core message is that cells respond to the environment around them, including our thoughts and beliefs. And there's a framework that we often use in coaching, and this isn't something that Peter explicitly teaches, but it describes why beliefs are so important, and it basically works like this. So your beliefs shape your emotions, and your emotions influence your thoughts, and your thoughts drive your decisions, and your decisions inform your actions, and your actions create your results. And then your results reinforce your original beliefs. And it's a loop, and it keeps running. And each result that you get from your belief reinforces the belief more and more. And a lot of personal development focuses on changing behavior. Just change the behavior. But behavior is actually one of the hardest places to intervene. Because if your thoughts are saying, this isn't safe, or this isn't me, or this won't work, discipline alone will only take you so far. And that's often why we fail. And your thoughts come from emotions. For example, I'm scared, I'm anxious. And your emotions come ultimately from your beliefs. For example, this isn't safe, I'm not liked, or I'm not going to be good enough, for example. And this is why belief work is so powerful, and why Peter spends the majority of his time helping people uncover beliefs that they didn't even realize that were running the show. Because when Peter reveals a hidden belief that is running the show, he'll often ask, is that belief actually true? Which, if you're a coach, it might remind you of the work of Byron Katie. And once that belief is truly examined, it often just collapses on its own, because rarely is it actually fully truth. And then what happens is the whole cycle starts to shift. Different thoughts arise, emotions soften, behavior changes organically, and different results follow, because you're operating from a new internal context. And that's the deeper work that Peter is doing with his coaching. So Peter doesn't present this technique as a rigid framework, but if you observe closely, there's a pattern to how he works. First, there is extraordinarily deep listening. He listens not just to what someone is saying, but to their body language, their breath, and their energy. He's listening for the core limiting belief. Then he helps trace that belief back, often to childhood, which is important as that's actually the time when our subconscious mind is developing and where unconscious patterns are often stored. And he might ask questions like, what happened? What did it mean to you at that time? What did you make it mean about yourself and who you are? And that's really the key. And once the underlying core belief is identified, he gently deconstructs the belief, helping people to see that those patterns and those beliefs, they're just software that was adopted, but it's not actually hardware or who they really are. It's mental coding that we developed to keep ourselves safe when we were young, but it can also be rewritten. So there are hundreds of coaches out there. What makes Peter so special at his craft? In my opinion, Peter's mastery comes from his incredible ability to listen deeply to someone's words, energy, and body language. He's also really skilled at helping people to see the unseen, the unconscious patterns they literally cannot access on their own. There's a phrase that I love to use, and it's that you can't read the label from the inside of the jar. And that's what Peter does. He helps people step outside the jar so they can see the label and what's making them who they are. And that's why people experience such profound breakthroughs in his presence. So in terms of the structure of the program, Peter starts each session with an educational component, which people can ask questions about, and then he spends the majority of time on coaching. When I did it, Peter ran really long live sessions, often extending to around 5 hours. He often overran because he wanted to help as many people as possible, and he genuinely is very generous with his time, presence, and energy, and he cares deeply about the people he is serving. The sessions are recorded for those that can't make it in person, so you can always catch up later. In addition to Peter, there are integration coaches who run optional separate sessions to help you digest and to apply the work. And then there's an online community of thoughtful, open people sharing breakthroughs and insights, and Peter will often respond to questions in the online community as well. Finally, if you're a graduate of the Mastermind, you get access to private events with Peter, which may be of interest if you love his work. Now, I want to mention a couple of caveats to be aware of. So first of all, there are a lot of participants, and not everyone will get the time to be coached by Peter directly. But almost every core limiting belief, blind spot, or internal struggle shows up in the room. You learn an enormous amount by watching others be coached, and very often you'll recognize your own patterns in someone else's story. The second thing you should be aware of is that if you are coached live, you agree that the footage may be used for educational or social media purposes, and you don't retain ownership of that content. Now, that surprised me initially, and it made me reluctant to put my hand up, as I didn't want my coaching session to be watched by thousands of people on his Instagram page. Having said that, I still got a huge amount of value by observing, and I still felt very much a part of things and seen as I had my camera on. And even though I wasn't being coached directly, I got a huge amount of value. Also, only a fraction of those being coached do end up on his social media. And I also want to mention that sharing the coaching breakthroughs on social media really helps other people have breakthroughs for themselves. So I do understand why he does it. And it's the reason he's been able to grow to over 1 million followers on Instagram sharing what he does. Also, the majority of his social media now seems to be focused more on live events rather than sharing from his mastermind. So it's not a certainty that if you put your hand up, your video will appear on his social media. But I wanted to share this detail with you so you understand what you're agreeing to as part of the mastermind. Now, let's talk about the cost. Yes, look, this is a significant investment, but when you compare the cost of the mastermind to what it would cost to work with Peter one-on-one, the value becomes very clear. And if you're on the fence financially, here's a few things to consider. If you work in corporate, check whether you have a training or professional development budget that you could apply for this kind of mindset or leadership work. If you're self-employed, it might be worth exploring whether this qualifies as professional coaching or training that could be tax deductible. Always check with your accountant though. And when you're considering whether or not to invest, I think it's also worth asking a different question. What is the cost for me not to invest? because staying stuck also has a cost. Repeating the same patterns has a cost. Living with an invisible ceiling has a cost. So sometimes the most expensive decision isn't the one that you make, it's the one that you keep postponing. So if you're feeling the pull, my invitation would be this. Don't just ask, what will this cost me? Also ask, what might this free me from? And for those of you that have made it this far, I do have a referral code that gives you 10% off the program, which you'll see on the screen now. And this is my gift to you to help you decide if now is the right time to invest in yourself, to give yourself the gift of freedom. Please note that I will receive a small commission if you do accept. So thank you in advance for letting me support you and for you supporting me. I really appreciate it. So in summary, I'm genuinely glad that I did the mastermind. And although I don't use Peter's methodology exclusively with my clients, his coaching methodology is a tool that I use that has absolutely made me a better coach. I also had a few aha moments with struggles that I was working through myself when I watched him coaching others. And so I'm grateful to have had that as well. So if you're on the fence, I would recommend totally jumping in. I'm really glad that I invested in the course, and I'm sure you will too.